Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. We thank each of you for joining. Before we get started with our content, I have a couple of housekeeping items. I'm Michaela Klauser, Senior Director of Producer Education here at NCBA. And tonight's webinar titled Managing Risk Takes a Team will feature Dr. Kenny Burdine, Clay Burtrum, Dr. Misty Edmondson, and Dr. Julia Herman. Before we kick things off, as a reminder, your line will be muted, but please feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen during the webinar, and at the end of the presentations, we'll get to as many of those as we can. If you're having trouble with your technology, or if you're joining only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in a few days at ncba.org underneath the producer tab or on our YouTube channel. Dr. Kenny Burdine joined the Agricultural Economics faculty at the University of Kentucky in 2012 and is currently an extension professor in livestock economics. Kenny focuses his extension program in the areas of livestock marketing, price risk management, and general profitability. He travels extensively and delivers 40 to 60 programs each year directly for livestock producers. His applied research interests are primarily focused on marketing and decision-making for beef, dairy, and forage producers. Clay Burtrum with Burtrum Cattle and Farm Data Services is coming to us from Stillwater, Oklahoma. In 2000, Clay chose to bring his expertise back to Stillwater and work for Farm Data Services as a managerial accounting firm serving the needs of farmers, ranchers, and rural businesses in a 5-state region. Farm Data Services was started by Clay's dad, Mike, in 1982. He also partners in Burtrum Cattle LLC, a cow-calf and stocker operation in Payne and Pawnee counties. He has dedicated himself to serving the industry, and he holds the highest regard and does his best to make an impact. Dr. Misty Edmondson worked in a mixed animal practice in rural Alabama for 2 years before returning to Auburn University in 2003 to pursue a comparative. I'm so sorry, Dr. Edmondson. These words are a little tough. Pursue a comparative theranology, if I pronounce that correctly. Theranology. Will you mind?
Theranology, close enough. Yep, that's it.
Thank you so much. Residency with a focus on food animal species. In 2006, Dr. Edmondson joined the faculty at Auburn University's College of Veterinary Medicine and was promoted to professor in 2018. In September 2018, she transitioned from Auburn to the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries, where she currently serves as an associate state veterinarian of livestock and poultry health. Dr. Julia Herman serves as NCBA's beef cattle specialist veterinarian and consults on animal health and welfare, biosecurity, and foreign animal disease preparedness and other preventative medicine practices. She has spent time in rural veterinary practice in Kansas, teaching livestock medicine at Colorado State University Veterinary Medicine Program, and currently leads education development and veterinary outreach for the producer education team and the BQA program. So with that, I'm going to be done talking and butchering words, I guess. Here we go. And Dr. Burdine, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good deal. Well, thanks a bunch. Greetings from the Commonwealth, and I'm glad to be invited to talk this evening. So I'm just going to share a few overarching comments about risk management. I'm going to talk about just real quick overview of 2 tools that I spend a fair amount of time with in my extension program. And then I'm going to just share kind of some general final thoughts on risk management strategies, and I'm really looking forward to what the other panelists have to say. So I'm just going to kind of lay the foundation here first. You know, we're all well aware that risk exists on many levels. You know, we're well aware of natural disaster risk. We're dealing with some of that here in Kentucky as we speak. Liability risk. In agriculture, with weather risk and production risk are always out there. Certainly with livestock, disease risk becomes an issue. As an economist, I spend most of my time in kind of the market and price space. So I spend some time, you know, thinking about and working with those types of risk and risk management strategies. The other thing that I like to say when I talk about introducing the topic of risk is that the amount of risk management tools available to cattle producers have really increased over the course of my career. I've been in extension, just started my 26th year. And there's a whole lot more that I can talk about now than there was, 15 and 20 years ago. And I think that's a positive thing. And I think understanding how to use those tools is beneficial. And I think it begins by simply knowing what tools are available to you. So, as a risk management tool, I think a lot of us think about the first thing we want to understand and utilize is, a typical farm type policy and know what that covers, what it doesn't, and so forth. We're going to talk some about biosecurity this evening. I'm looking forward to hearing Misty talk about that. I'm going to provide a quick overview of pasture, rangeland, and forage insurance, which is a rainfall insurance product, or more accurately, a lack of rainfall insurance product that we actually personally use a little bit. You've got traditional risk management tools, traditional price risk management tools, contracting, futures, options, and so forth. I've probably spent more time talking about LRP insurance the last 3 or 4 years than anything else through my extension programming. And then, although I don't have access to this in Kentucky, I think if you're in one of the 4 states that is piloting it, I think you want to be aware of this weaned calf risk protection program, or the weaned calf risk protection insurance part that's out there right now, and may or may not become more widely available in the coming years. So when I talk about pasture, rangeland, and forage insurance, and the same thing when I talk about LRP in a minute, if I'm doing an extension setting, I'll spend 30 to 45 minutes talking about how it works, providing illustrations and things like that. For the sake of this short webinar, I'm going to just provide a 1-slide, 2-minute overview. But, again, we do use pasture, rangeland, and forage insurance on the cattle operation I partner on. It's worked reasonably well for us to give us some rainfall risk protection. When you buy PRF insurance, you're purchasing coverage against less than normal rainfall, and normal is defined as what is historically, has been rainfall on average going back to 1948 in a 17 by 17 mile grid, and that's a quarter latitude by quarter longitude is what that 17 by 17 mile grid actually refers to. You can insure between 70 and 90% of that normal, and you buy coverage in 2-month intervals. So you have to cover at least 2 2-month periods. For example, this is what we do. We cover June, July, August, September, because in our case, those are the months that we're most concerned about rainfall. That'll be different for everybody on this webinar, but for us, that's what we have chosen to do. Every acre that you cover, whether it be covered as grazing ground or hay ground, will have a base value, and you do have the ability to adjust that a little bit for productivity. You can adjust it upward by as much as 150% or downward as well. So the last bullet here is kind of my quick overview of how it works, but let's just say, for example, that I had covered just what I said, 2 2-month periods like we do. The base value per acre for our grazing ground might be $100 an acre. And I'm going to allocate that $100 into those 2 2-month periods. So for example, if we use June, July, and then August and September, and we bought 90% coverage, and we allocated half of that $100 into that June, July 2-month period, and then let's say for the 2025 months of June and July, we got 50% of normal rainfall, then we're 40% short of our 90% coverage. And the easy way to think about that is I've got $50 of coverage in June and July. I'm 40% short of coverage. 40% of that $50 is $20 an acre. And I would get a $20 indemnity per acre for that 2-month period. I would do the exact same thing for the next 2-month period that I covered. That's just kind of a quick overview of how PRF works. I mentioned that I've talked about livestock risk protection insurance a lot the last couple of years. It's actually been made a lot more attractive since 2020. It's an index insurance product that protects a cattle producer from price decreases in the CME feeder cattle index. The idea being that as the value of cattle on the CME feeder cattle index goes down, most likely so do the value of the cattle that you would sell as a cattle producer. Every policy has an ending date and an expected value. And again, this is ultimately the expected ending value of that CME index on that ending date. You choose an ending date as close as when you can to when the cattle will be sold. They're available as little as 13 weeks out, and then from there every 4 weeks after that, so 13, 17, 21, 25, and so forth. And on the ending On the ending date, if the ending value of the CME index is less than the coverage level that you purchased, an indemnity is due on that difference for every pound that you choose to cover. So again, simple illustration here in my last bullet. If I purchase coverage on 800-pound steers at a coverage level of 260 per hundredweight, again, I've got coverage if on the ending date that index is below 260. Let's say that in June, on that ending date, the actual ending value was 240. I'm $20 per hundredweight less than my coverage level. $20 a hundredweight on 800 pounds is $160. So I'm going to receive an indemnity of about 160. Again, this is high level overview, but I wanted to kind of explain how these two products work because they're two that I've spent a fair amount of time with over the course of my career and then the last several years for sure. I'm going to end with just a few general risk management thoughts that I think are good for most folks to kind of keep in the back of their mind. And I think first thing I would say is having a plan is step one. The worst risk management plan is simply not having one at all. I like to say that it's a good way to start by simply knowing how changes in price impact your profit levels. So for example, if you're a background or a stocker operator that moves 800-pound steers, you want to do some price sensitivity and play with different sale price levels. What if the price you expect at sale time is 10 cents, 20 cents, 30 cents less, and see how that affects your returns? That can be pretty eye-opening. I mentioned before, know what tools are out there and consider multiple strategies. You don't have to do all or nothing. No one strategy works best for everybody. Know what's out there and be creative at times. You also want to certainly think about your financial position and risk preference. Some folks are more or less risk averse. Some, frankly, due to risk, some due to financial positions. Maybe they're younger farmers, beginning farmers, more leverage, simply can't take more risk. And all of those things need to be considered. I showed this chart a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, but I just want to make the point that we've been in a bull market the last couple of years, and this is the nearby feeder cattle futures contract, and I've got it starting back in January of 2023, and it goes to roughly last week. And you'll notice that we've been trending upward, and in fact we've increased the value of these calves by more than $80 a hundredweight during that roughly 25 and a half month period. But I can also go in here and I can circle some pretty significant market drops. So I like to just make the point that even in a bull market like this one, there are times when we are exposed to price risk. It's always present, something to always plan for. As I think about that, a few final thoughts. If you do something like buy a put option, purchase LRP insurance, I encourage folks to treat that premium like a production cost. Drop it into the budget and then don't look back. Too often, I think we like to manage risk by looking back and saying, did my risk program make me money last year? But you manage risk looking forward. I don't look back at a farm insurance policy and say, gosh, I paid premium and didn't have some sort of major claim, right? And I think you want to look at something like price risk the same way. I like to tell producers, don't do anything you don't understand. I do get calls on occasion from producers that have used a future strategy that maybe they didn't fully understand. They don't know why they're getting margin call. So I always like to say that there's nothing wrong with simple, and sometimes simple works fine. And you can get more complicated with your strategy as you learn more about your options. I also like to tell people that it's a good idea to set pricing targets ahead of time. It's difficult to make risk management decisions in real time. If you're looking at contracting cattle or buying something like LRP, when the market's moving upward, we have a tendency as humans to want to kind of wait and kind of find the top, and that becomes a fool's game. Similarly, when the market's going down, we tend to not want to lock in a price or purchase something we could have done better the week before. So I like to tell people, set targets ahead of time. When the market gets there, act. And then finally, I like to say that, it's human nature not to want to leave money on the table occasionally, and I understand that. But it's inevitable if you do a good job as a risk manager that you will buy insurance at times and not need it. You will price some cattle a bit early sometimes, and that's okay. I like to say that if you're not leaving money on the table occasionally, you're probably taking too much risk. I wanted just to throw up my contact info. If you have questions or want to follow up, feel free to reach out to me, and I will look forward to listening to the rest of the panelists.
Clay, you're still muted if you're speaking.
Okay, all right, there we go. Sorry about that.
Yep.
Kenny, thank you for that great presentation, and I'm going to dive into some of that same stuff. I'm with Farm Data Services out of Stillwater, Oklahoma. We began in 1981 just as a consulting firm, and we specialize in agricultural accounting for small businesses. We've been based here for 44 years going on this year. So what do? We help with FSA programs and different CSP, EQIP, different loan programs. More or less in the past few years, we talk a lot about tax planning events, life events. Those are some of our risk strategies that we help with. And then what we're talking about this evening, risk management, contracts, and hedging. And then one of the areas that I focus on in our business is appraisals, inspections, crop insurance, LRP, PRF, and annual forage, much like Dr. Burdine had just talked about. So one thing in my introduction, I don't have a doctor in front of my name, but I got a lot of BS behind it, so I'll try to make this quick as we get through there. So as they mentioned in the introduction, I'm also a partner with my dad. Moved home here 24 years ago to work with him. And so we have a stocker and cow-calf operation. We're here in central Oklahoma in the middle of what we call wheat pasture country. It's been kind of sparse this year, but I'm not going to read through all this. You can kind of see that what kind of operation we run here. So let's talk a little bit about some of the current issues that are facing the agricultural industry. When we look at high and low commodity prices, are we going to have a crop? This Friday is the end of the discovery period for all of our crops. We got some extreme volatility in these markets. Extreme drought. I got a hold of the weatherman, Mr. Makins, this last week, and I was asking him, why are we having these extreme drought and wet, and then the extreme cold that we faced last week? Just to give you some perspective, a week ago today, we were -10. We were 85 degrees today here in central Oklahoma. So just La Nina is sure playing with us here. And then we look at what the erosion of working capital is doing, the increasing, decreasing of land and equipment values of our farmers and ranchers. Are we even going to get a farm bill in 25? That's some really some big discussions as Secretary Rollins has come on board. And then the politics and the trade wars of what's going on. And here in Oklahoma, a lot of medical marijuana discussions. And then, if you look at the economy and the way it's running, ag usually runs about a year to year and a half ahead of the regular economy. And, they say now the regular economy is in a recession, and ag has been in a recession for pretty much over a year if you look at most of the balance sheets of most of our farmers. Many of you have seen this beef cattle inventory that shows the decline of what we've seen since 22 as we start to try to build this cow herd. But my next slide is going to show you what you need to be looking at as we talk about, are we going to build this cow herd? Are we going to keep these cows as replacements? And that's one thing as you look at the feed yard and the cattle on feed inventories that we get each week, each month. Are we going to keep these heifers in the feed yards, or are we going to keep them back on the farm? So here we are tonight. We're going to talk about risk protection. As Dr. Burdine shared, market risk, we have more tools than we've ever had before. From forward contracting to futures and options. If you've been hedging, you've probably been calling your banker for margin calls. Market risk, you have to learn how to manage that risk. You got NAP at FSA, PRF, as talked about with a sales closing date at 12/15. Annual forage, that's for wheat pasture and hayland, much like we have. These are all rainfall products. And then much like we're going to dive in here in a minute, I'm going to give you some real life examples of LRP. That's for unborn calves, feeders, and even fed cattle that we're going to talk about. But the worst protection we can have is just no protection. We're just going to ride this thing out. I don't know how many of you probably drive your car around without insurance. Probably not many of us. We're going to go home to a warm home tonight that's probably insured. So that's what we need to think about when we think about our farming operations as well. I'm old enough to know the freeze-on beef in 1973 when my dad we were in the cattle business then. The dairy buyout of 1985, the BSE cow of 2003, and believe it or not, LRP was around then. I had 6 computers running that night trying to buy LRP, and it's been around that many years. The bird flu of 2024, you know, without the great folks of NCBA, we probably would have had a cattle shutdown. The White House was that close to doing it. And what's next? What is the unknown that's out there that we don't know of what might be coming down the road for this cattle industry? So in the cattle markets, there's one for everyone. You know, we can insure the cow-calf pairs, the dairy, that crossbred longhorn and the high fence might be able to insure that one. These are some of my bred heifers and some of my steers from last year that I shipped. And I always got to show this one. This is my wife's pet Highland cows, so we can even insure those. So let's dive in a little bit and talk about LRP. What is LRP? We can have it. It's feeder cattle to protect against the declining market prices. It is not a mortality program. It covers cattle from under the weight of 600 pounds and then 600 to 1,000 pounds. Then we can also insure fed cattle, which I did some of those this evening before this webinar, that goes from 1,000 to 1,600 pounds that are in the feed yard. LRP cattle, as we talked about, can be cow-calf, stockers, feeders, grower yards, and even fed cattle. And the unique things about LRP, there's no 50,000 pound requirement. You can insure one head, and we can do up to 1,000 head on one specific coverage endorsement. And as we talked about, you can do up to 25,000 head annually and 12,000 head per endorsement. So what are the benefits of LRP? There's no margin calls, there's no brokerage fees, there's no minimum head counts, there's no contract sizes. There's no upfront cost. Your premium is billed the month after your endorsement ends. So for example, if you insure it 13 weeks, that puts you at the end of May today. Your bill would be coming due in June. In the event you have an indemnity, that would be taken out of your claim or taken out of your bill that would be billed in this example. So you set a floor price, and like Dr. Burdine said, you don't look back. You set that floor, you read your top, you leave your upside potential open. There's no requirement to sell the cattle when the endorsement period is over. Your contract expires. And also keep in mind, if your cattle are doing really well, maybe you want to take advantage of the high market, you can sell those cattle 60 days also prior to the expiration date of your contract. That was put in many years ago due to drought. The coverage is based on the number of head, sex, and projected sale weight that you pick when you buy the LRP contract. And the coverage can also be transferred to new owners upon the sale. So I want to talk a little bit about how we settle this. We settle against the CME Feeder Cattle Cash Index. The Feeder Cattle Cash Index, and I'm not going to read through all this, is the USDA feeder cattle reports from the following states. It's a large #1 steer from 7 to 899 pounds with direct feeder trade, video sales, internet sales. And today, I looked it up, put it on this slide. Today, that feeder cattle index is 278.84. A week ago, that was 272. And if you look back on another presentation I did on this, was 258 last June. So we've increased, as you've seen the market come up to 258. So this is an example of a client that bought 800-pound LRP in September of 2023. His insured value was $270. He had $2,160 a head. His premium was almost $9 a hundred, so $70. His end date was May 21st of 2024. Index closed on May 21st of 248. You can walk through the math of his 172 a head less his premium was $102 a head net return. He's steers sold for $2,112. 2214 was his net return with LRP. He sold his steers in Oklahoma City that week for $230 at $2,070. But with LRP, you can see he netted back $2,214 after the premium. Okay. This is another example of heifers. These are actually my cattle, 800 pounds, 232. These were insured just to have kind of a bottom floor. You can see after the indemnity was paid, they barely kind of made it. They netted back $21 on the whole deal, but they were covered. That's the deal. I covered my risk and I had my bottom side. So let's talk a little bit about what this would cost you if you're a guy that's going to sell next October. This is the high price based off of today's prices. You could insure those cattle weighing 500 pounds for next October at $301. Cost you $1,500. You're insured at $1,500 a head. Would cost you $53. And if you say, Clay, I don't want to spend that much, there's a price for everybody in this program. And so you could spend $14 a head, insure them at $1,350, and that still expires in October. Same thing on a steer at 500 pounds. You can insure her at $1,370, cost you $47 a head, or the other extreme, you only want to spend $13 a head, cost you $260. So if you're this guy today that's buying grass cattle and you want to look at shipping these in August, and you're going to the Flint Hills or something like that because it's that time of year, you can see a steer weighing 800 coming out in August at $275. You're going to spend $66 a head. $2,200 a head insurance, or on the other extreme, you can see I'm only going to spend $9 a head. You know, those 5-weight steers or 6-weight steers today are costing north of $1,735. But just to cover the cost. Same way on the heifers, you can see the numbers there. So what is the logistics of LRP? You want to find a qualified LRP agent that is eligible in your state. Where are the cattle at the time of insurance? So in my example, if they're in Oklahoma and you're going to run them in the Flint Hills of Kansas, where are they at the time that you bought the cattle? That's the state of origin. You want to sign an LRP application. If you've already signed one of these and you want to work with another agent, you have to do that on the June 30th transfer date. SCE is a specific coverage endorsement, and you want to utilize electronic signatures, a fax, in-person signatures. A lot of us use the electronic signatures today to do that. Excuse me. You want to know your numbers. You want to talk about cow-calf numbers, stockers, and you want to make sure you know what those numbers are. I want to talk a little bit to the cow-calf guy out there, because that may be a lot of what you guys are on the call this evening. If you're a guy that's calving 100 head, let's just use that number, and you're like, I don't know how many steers and heifers I'm going to have. You know you're going to have about a probably 50-50 calf crop. Only do 40, 80% of them, do 40 steers, do 40 heifers. Then when you do your spring working, you can adjust that number up. Same way on your stockers. You know, look at what those are, you know what you buy. You want to keep accurate records. Much like I mentioned earlier, this is not a mortality, a death loss program, but those cattle are covered if you turn the death loss in to your agent within 48 hours. You want to have accurate records of sales. Only insure what you own. This is not a hedging program. I did have a guy one time that actually insured cattle that he did not own, and that got pretty hairy when you have the claims. One thing that I do want to mention is you just want to be able to work with an agent that can only not sell this, but you want to have somebody that can work you through the claim process when you have an indemnity. You have 5 to 7 days to get that turned in. You want to work with a sales receipt, the vet receipts, failed receipts, and those signed affidavit. So in summary, the prices change every single day. The new prices come out at 4 o'clock. You want to work with that application to get your on file today. And what does the agent need to know when you want to buy it? You want to work with the weight, the price, and the expiration date. And how much do you want to spend? What works for your operation? And like I said earlier, you can insure unborn, steers, heifers, and even fed cattle. So where do you find the prices? You can sign up with me or any other qualified agent for daily customized email quotes. You can find them at the RMA website. You want to work with an approved insurance provider that's trained and qualified agent, and we're all an equal opportunity provider. So I want to tie all this back in a little bit to what we're talking about with risk management strategies, back to my perspective on my ranch. You know, you got to talk about the movement of the records, the animals, the people, who's moving in and out of your ranch, the tracking of all the different vehicles. You know, cameras are always set up. What's movement around your deal? You know, we have to talk about the secure beef supply plan and the continuity of our business of what we're doing. And it's all about the beef. We have to think about that end consumer. who is buying our product. You know, I tell the guys that work for me, we always have to think about, is that camera watching us and what are we doing? And at the end of the goal, it's about traceability. Because you can see my statement at the bottom there. If it's not if, it's when something is going to happen and something's going to attack us, you know, from a biosecurity plan. Do we have a written plan? Do you have a premise ID? If you don't, you need to get one. A contingency plan for non-movement. Okay, we talk about LRP and having these risk management strategies. You know, over a year ago, we had a lot of wildfires in the Texas Panhandle. I picked up the phone, I called my underwriter and asked, what happened if I had an LRP customer insured and he lost his whole stalker crop? Would it have been insured or covered? The morbidity and mortality would not have been covered, but the cattle would have been covered if he'd have turned in the plan correctly, had he had a claim and worked with his agent. So, you know, contingency for non-movement when it comes to the risk management. Are you financially stable if you didn't have a non-movement? If you couldn't sell your cattle? Do you have enough hay? Do you have enough feed? Those kind of things, you know, there. Are you monitoring for diseases? We all have a cell phone camera. Terry, you know, if you see something that looks odd, take a picture of it. Make sure you have that working relationship with the vet and who that is. Document, write it down, take a picture. I can't say that enough, you know, when you look at this. So the 11th commandment, my dad taught me this, is that, you know, we all have to make a profit in what we're doing. And then finally, the 7 most expensive words in this business is you've always done it that way, and we can't continue to keep doing that on our farms and ranches. We have to look for a better way to do things. So I'll turn it over to Misty, and thank you for your time.
All right, thanks, Clay. That's a great introduction for me to begin my discussion here on the importance of biosecurity planning and the secure beef supply plan, just offering a perspective that I have as a state animal health official here in Alabama. First, I would like to thank NCBA. It's been a great opportunity for me to be a part of the working group, the advisory group here. I'm a state animal health official, but I'm also a veterinarian and a beef cattle producer. And so I understand the impact that a disease like foot and mouth disease, we always use that as our example because that's the worst case scenario, because we've had it here before in the US, and it is throughout the world as well. But I understand the impact that that would have on our industry. I've been able to participate in some of the foot and mouth disease exercises over the last several years, and how critical it is for our industry to be prepared as much as we can, you know, for when, and like Clay said, probably more of when something like this were to happen. We know that this type of preparation for us is going to require all aspects of our industry. And fortunately, this working group has been able to bring, you know, a variety of people together working from different aspects to help move this forward. And I'm really excited to be a part of it. So first, thank you, NCBA, and you guys for letting me participate. I appreciate the discussions on managing risk, and at first I thought, well, my discussion may be a little bit different, but that's really what the secure beef supply plan is. It's just another way to help producers manage risk. And then, so I'm just gonna go ahead as we start thinking about foot and mouth disease. That's what this secure beef supply plan kind of really revolves around. In the enhanced biosecurity plan and the secure beef supply plan that is associated with that, it's just another tool for helping us as producers manage risk. All right, so again, this is my perspective as a state animal health official, but keep in mind again that as a veterinarian and a producer, I'm trying to bring some common sense approaches to how we deal with it here in our state and how we manage our enhanced biosecurity plans. But I think it's important for producers to understand what our goals as state animal health officials are. And that's first to contain the disease. We've got to find out where this disease is and where it's not, and then contain that disease on an infected farm. And so you're going to hear a lot about biosecurity. We can't preach that enough. I probably have that word on every slide here, but containing that disease is going to be critical. The faster we can identify it, the faster we can contain it, the faster we can get back to our normal activities. Beyond controlling and containing that disease, controlling the spread of the disease. And so by controlling the spread, again, biosecurity and movement standstill. I think Clay talked a little bit about having some contingency plans if there is a movement standstill or that stop movement order. That in the beginning of an outbreak, it may be up to 72 hours where we're not moving any susceptible livestock or their products. And so that's going to, again, help us as state animal health officials get our heads around where this disease is at and what we need to do to make sure we can contain it as quickly as possible. Part of that managing and controlling the spread of disease is going to involve the use of movement permits. And that may be something that some of us aren't familiar with in the beef industry, because we fortunately haven't had to deal with that a lot. But if you talk to any of your poultry friends and they've been involved with a high path avian influenza situation, they're very familiar with movement permits. And that's just something we do as state animal health officials, as regulatory officials, to make sure we're not moving this disease around. We make sure that the farms and the animals are free of disease before we allow them to move. The movement permits allow us, though, to get our producers back and that continuity of business that Clay referred to, keeping us selling our product and moving as quickly as we can. And that's going to be key for all of us, as we know. So, we have some level of biosecurity on our farms every day. We may not think about it, but on the day-to-day, we do have some level of biosecurity. It's important to remember in a disease outbreak, we're just going to take that biosecurity that we already have and we're going to ramp it up tremendously. And that's why we refer to this as an enhanced biosecurity plan. So what does an enhanced biosecurity plan involve? It may seem like a lot here, but I promise you it's very straightforward. It's the things you do probably already. You just may not document every single aspect of it. So we want to ensure that we have good biosecurity practice, and that's going to be to limit the exposure of diseases to the animals on our farms. So we're going to restrict animal movement onto and off of our farms, pest and rodent control, because they can spread disease as well, limiting contact with outside animals and fence line contact as well. We're going to have to learn about disease monitoring, how to detect and respond to disease outbreaks. That's going to be surveillance, on-farm surveillance. And we'll talk a little bit about the training down there at the bottom, but training our employees to know what foot and mouth disease or whatever the disease may be looks like, so that they can surveil the herd every day and then report that to you or to the state animal health official or whoever it may be that needs to know about it. Again, just trying to control that disease. Movement records are critical, tracking the movement of animals and products, so that if there were a detection on a farm or an infection on a farm, that we could then figure out where those animals had moved to and hopefully stop the disease from spreading further. I've already mentioned the permit guidance that would be required to move products and animals, and that's going to hinge on an enhanced biosecurity plan. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. But business continuity, again, that's our ultimate goal as producers, as state animal health officials, is to keep us in business and keep our product moving. But that does begin with training. We have to train ourselves on these biosecurity plans. We have to train our employees on biosecurity at an enhanced level that maybe they've never seen before. So that all is going to be very critical for our biosecurity plans. I think the one thing that the realization that I had with a lot of these foot and mouth disease training exercises that we did before is that most of your state veterinarian's office or your state animal health officials, they're the few but the mighty. I would like to say that there's just not very many of them. And disease outbreaks will place a tremendous strain on already limited resources. We're seeing that now with high path AI in poultry in states that have poultry and dairy cattle infections, tremendous strain on those states and even the federal resources as well. So as part of our managing risk here, it'd be better for us to go ahead and have that enhanced biosecurity plan in place, ready to go, just in case we need it before an outbreak starts. Again, I like to think of this as a insurance policy more than anything else. That will, if we have it in place beforehand, doing everything we can before an outbreak actually happens, that's going to prevent delays in getting permits and moving animals. And again, that's our goal, is to move animals as best we can, as fast as we can. So again, I mentioned that enhanced biosecurity plan, in my mind, I like to think of it as a type of an insurance plan. You hope you never need insurance, but we all have it in some form or fashion, just in case we need it. And again, this enhanced biosecurity plan is something that we can do before an actual outbreak happens, that if we need it, we just operate day to day, typically on our usual day-to-day biosecurity plan. But if we do have an outbreak of foot and mouth disease, we can pull that enhanced biosecurity plan off the shelf and implement it immediately. And it's easy to complete. There's tremendous amount of resources on the Secure Beef Supply Plan website. And I think Julia's going to talk more about those resources. It requires information that we are all already familiar with as producers, as veterinarians on our operations. Anything from where we're going to bury our mortality, or how we're going to feed, and how feed trucks would move onto our farms and things like that. It's things that we already know. It's just putting it down on paper so that we can train employees if and when we need to move to that next level of biosecurity. And I would recommend involving your veterinarian if at all possible. Veterinarians have a really unique perspective on your farm. They may see some things that you might not, just from being there on the day-to-day. They may be familiar with your operation and may be able to point out some things that may be helpful. They are also very familiar with biosecurity procedures, and so they can offer some really valuable help on your farm. Permitted movements, again, this is going to be the critical part for us as producers, is moving our beef, moving our cattle during a foot and mouth disease outbreak. If this happens, if we have an outbreak, there will be no movement of cattle, particularly in affected areas, but could be, across states, definitely across counties, without this movement permit. Some of the steps for us as producers to attain a movement permit from a state animal health official, typically, and these have to be approved by the state animal health official. But some of the steps, the first step is having a national premises ID number. You can get that from your state veterinarian's office or your Department of Animal Health. You can go ahead and have an enhanced biosecurity plan in place that has been previously approved. And ready to go. Like I said, that insurance plan sitting on the shelf. Knowing what signs of foot and mouth disease or other diseases of concern look like, and so you're not having to learn from scratch from day one. And then keeping those movement records of animals and people, equipment, and anything else that may be coming onto or off of your premises. One of the things that's important to keep in mind with a movement permit during an animal disease outbreak like this is that the movement of animals interstate will require the approval of the receiving state. And so having that enhanced biosecurity plan that's been approved by your state animal health official will likely expedite the approval process and therefore make it much faster for you to be able to move your animals when the time comes. So there's a lot that we can do ahead of time to prepare ourselves for this type of disease outbreak. Again, it's just our insurance plan, and there are plenty of resources available to us. We know that our state and federal resources in a foot and mouth disease outbreak are automatically going to be stretched very thin. So the more preparation that we can make ahead of time, the faster we'll be able to control that disease and move cattle, and again, mitigate our risk as we move forward in a disease outbreak. So I think that's all I have, and I'm happy to take any questions when the time comes. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Wow, we've had such a powerhouse lineup of speakers today, and really challenging us to look at the big picture. I think the financial side, risk management, it applies to a lot of different areas within our cattle operations, and I think our speakers have done a really great job of doing that. I'm just going to give a quick update. Julia Herman, I appreciate all of our speakers joining in on us. I think we have a good swath of the stocker industry of represented here, but all of this was supported by a grant that NCBA received from the USDA National Animal Disease Preparedness and Response Program. And the idea behind this was to use this grant to improve education and outreach to all of our stakeholders, including beef producers, veterinarians, transporters, about the Secure Beef Supply Plan, and further that collaboration across all those different care levels that's already been talking about in the goal of prevention and preparedness for foot and mouth disease. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, all of our resources, this is a one-pager of what our project has already developed. Misty already talked about a number of things that the information that we need during an outbreak, that we've created resources for you to learn more about it. So that includes what to expect during a national movement standstill, premises identification, what is it or what is needed and how is it used. And then we're also incorporating a lot of parts of the sector that haven't been included with resources before, and that's our transporters. So we do have a livestock hauler transporter enhanced biosecurity steps, and also a contingency planning for livestock haulers and transporters. We know that our cattle industry is incredibly diverse. We want to make sure all of the stakeholders are prepared prior to a potential foot and mouth disease outbreak. If you're interested, you can find this one-pager on our NCBA website under the producers tab with all of our biosecurity resources that point to the Secure Beef Supply website and also our BQA website. If you're interested and want to learn more, this is a Cattleman to Cattleman episode that aired on October 29th, but you can find it on YouTube. This goes over all of the biosecurity information. It also features Misty. She was able to help us with part of our filming, but talking about how do producers and everybody, producers, veterinarians, how do we work together to build these plants and to keep our cattle and our beef supply safe. The big thing, as we're talking about all this, the need for an SBS plan or a secure beef supply plan, we want to protect our herd. It is not going to be normal during an outbreak, but we want to prepare you as much as we can prior to that happening. We want to maintain that supply chain. We want to keep cattle and other livestock moving through the system because we are still providing that food to our customers and our consumers. And we want to minimize lost income. Like I said, it's not going to be normal, but we can try to mitigate some of that risk as we're building these plans. But that's all I'm going to show. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. But we are going to pop over to some questions. I can stop sharing. Stop. I'm going to start off with, and I think Kenny and Clay, you both talked about this, but Kenny, I'll have you start. So each animal we know is even more valuable now because of some of those numbers that we saw, like the cattle herd's getting smaller, not as many heifers are being retained. So Kenny, how do we protect them, and what are some steps that we can do that producers can do if they don't have any of that financial or risk management in place? Where are some resources that they can go to?
I think if you're looking at a way to protect yourself from what clearly exists, downside price risk, and I think you make a good point that cattle are as valuable as they've been probably over the course of my lifetime and many others, is that, understanding that is number one. I think there's two things I guess I would say. The first thing I would say is, first of all, educate yourself by knowing what's out there and knowing how some of these tools work. And the second thing is, find a partner you're comfortable working with if you go the insurance route or if you go the commodity futures route, right? Find a broker that you're comfortable working with that will educate you and work with you. Find an insurance provider that you can work with that is a good, service provider and takes time to show you what needs to be done and so forth. So I think it's a matter of educating yourself and finding a good partner is where I think you start.
That's fantastic. Clay, I'm going to go to you next. I wrote down one of your quotes, and I'm totally going to steal this in some of my presentations, but the worst protection is no protection. I really like that applies to so many aspects of our operations. So when you are trying to protect your herd, let's say from a health basis, you really hammered on having that relationship with your veterinarian. Can you talk about how that veterinarian client patient relationship you use for the health of your animals, but also like when you are thinking about this biosecurity, how do you utilize that relationship?
Well, it's not just having them out once a year to preg check your cows. It's that relationship. I'm calling them when you're driving down the road, just talking to them about what's going on from a herd health. And I'll use my farm example. I have a guy that preg checks my cows. He's been my vet for 40 plus years. But then I also have a consulting vet group that we go through our medicine plan once or twice a year. What's new, what's there, what's coming out. We look at our whole health protocol that we do. We didn't touch on any of the risk management today about mortality insurance on your herd bulls. I mean, I lost a bull last week in the snow, and I got the check today for the insurance on there. So that, and it had to be necropsied, and the vet had to be work with that. So this risk management thing is a total farm thing. I mean, I'll roll it back to the vehicles, to your farm employees, it's a totality deal, to the ATVs, to what name, trust me, I could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about this, to what name did you insure those in when you talk about risk management strategies. But to tie it to back what you said of that veterinary client relationship, from the VFD to what shots you're given to, using the dart gun, all those things is very important to that relationship with the vet.
Excellent points. Misty, you talked, and I've been in a room where all the state vets and assistant and associate state vets are in the room, and it really is, you said it like it's a small group, but it's a mighty and powerful group, and you have a lot of influence on animal health within not just your states, but just across the country. But what can producers do to connect more with what the state vets or the state Department of Ag are doing on a state basis, and how do they stay abreast of that? Because I think that communication between the producer and veterinarians all the way up to the state level is really important on an everyday basis, but also during an outbreak.
Yeah, that's a great question. And as a state animal health official, I think we're always looking for better ways to communicate with our producers. We reach out and have advisory committees, from traceability to secure beef supply plans and things like that here in Alabama. And just call your state veterinarian. They're all pretty great folks, to be honest with you. And I think they'd appreciate hearing from producers what needs our producers have, how critical it is for them to have an approved secure beef supply plan. And it works a little bit different in each state, but I'll tell you, I think the state veterinarians would be happy to hear from producers, whether by email or give them a phone call and let them know the things that are important to you. And serving on advisory groups or committees and things like that, offering the input and providing us some real world advice. I think that's the best way, is to be involved and try to help the state veterinarians. We need all the help we can get. Like I said, we're a small group, but providing resources and information and guidance would be critical for our producers to be able to help our animal health officials.
Oh, that's great. That communication across all those levels of animal care is so important, and it's good to understand what is happening in your state, what's happening regionally, and I think that's a great, that's a really impactful tip. We did get a question, and I think, well, I might push this to you, Misty. Is there a current concern on an FMD outbreak in the industry? I mean, FMD hasn't been in the States since 1929, but at least from my aspect, from what we're looking at, I mean, one, it affects multiple species, so it's all two-toed species, so that's a big risk. But I mean, we live in a global economy. Like we live in a lot, you know, there's a lot of air travel, there's a lot of ship travel, there's a lot of people travel. So there is a risk of diseases like FMD coming in. But what other diseases or what other threats do you see, Misty, from your aspect that the cattle industry and honestly the livestock industry should be paying attention to?
Yeah, no, that's a that's a great question, and you know we're always on alert and always you know looking at what else is out there. I think and probably most of our producers on this call probably have heard about the New World screwworm, and that just takes you know one incident of bringing an animal across or moving an animal across the border. That could have that. That's down in Mexico. So we pay particular attention to those diseases that are close by, and hopefully we're managing that and getting that under control with the sterile fly release down there. But New World screwworm is definitely on our radar. There's a lot of tropical diseases, ticks and things like that in some of the other, especially Caribbean countries that we're worried about. But you know, you're exactly right. We are a global economy, and I think we'd all be fooling ourselves if we didn't think that the U.S. Economy would be a target for people that wish to do us harm. And so it would be relatively naive, I think, of us to think that foot and mouth disease couldn't happen here in the U.S. again, either accidentally or intentionally. It is in South America and Europe, Asia, Africa. So we know it's out there. And again, just the things that we do to make sure that we're being as thorough as we can. We do foreign animal disease investigations for anything that looks remotely similar to foot and mouth disease. There's a lot of diseases that we have here in the States that look a lot like foot and mouth disease. So if we get a phone call from a producer or a veterinarian that's concerned that, hey, this looks a little bit like foot and mouth disease, we're going to go out and test it no matter what. So we're constantly doing surveillance here in the States to make sure we don't miss a potential case of something that could look like foot and mouth disease.
Certainly, and that's, yeah, I talk to producers a lot about that. We're trained as veterinarians that any blister or vesicular disease in a ruminant or a swine client or producer or swine animal gets a foreign animal disease investigation just to make sure. We are pushing up against time, and I just want to thank each of our speakers. We have a couple questions we're not going to be able to get to, unfortunately, but I think we have a lot of great ways that producers can find more information, from extension to insurance agencies to universities to their state veterinarian. If any producers in the audience haven't checked out our resources at securebeef.org or on bqa.org, one of the first steps, BQA created our daily biosecurity plan for disease prevention, and we modeled it after the Secure Beef Supply Plan because we wanted that information to be similar across plans, and so producers can start with the BQA plan and step up to that enhanced biosecurity plan like Dr. Edmondson talked about. So thank you to all our speakers. Thanks to everyone who attended. We appreciate you joining in, and hope everyone has a great evening.